Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description.
Hello and welcome along to the latest episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show from the Manchester Evening News. I am today's host, George Smith, and joining me, of course, is our Chief United writer, Mr. Samuel Luckhurst, who is currently at the airport waiting to board his flight back to England after covering United's 1-1 draw with Real Sociedad last night. Samuel, how are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, fine, thank you. Sorry if there's any background noise here. Obviously, been in an airport departures lounge, just waiting until our flight to Düsseldorf and then on to Manchester, because there aren't too many direct flights between Manchester and Bilbao, unsurprisingly. There may be in May if United get to the final, but not at the moment.
Well, fingers crossed for that. But on today's show, myself and Samuel are going to reflect on last night's draw with Sociedad and look ahead to Sunday's big clash with Arsenal at Old Trafford. But starting with last night, of course, Samuel, you were there. United probably kicking themselves that they didn't take a lead into next week's second leg at Old Trafford. They took the lead through Joshua Zirkzee, but got pegged back by a debatable penalty decision in the second half. But generally speaking, it was a decent performance for United and much improved.
It was certainly for 70 minutes. I thought they controlled the game very competently. They got the goal eventually with Zirkzee scoring in, I think it was the 57th minute. And they were very good value for it at the time. They'd had some pretty good openings in the first half. They had some decent chances at 1-0 as well. And Zirkzee said afterwards to TV, I think, that they need to be more clinical, which you could say about United every week of this season. That was certainly echoed by Ruben Amorim at his post-match press conference, and then by Casemiro, who spoke in the mix zone as well. And it's a strange one, because if they get through, you look at this game, you think, yep, it was a good performance, good result. They oversaw that pretty well. But of course, United have to get through, and their record at home this season is very iffy, to say the least. Amorim has spoken about the anxiety they've had at Old Trafford as well. Regardless of who the opposition is, you've seen Leicester push United close. You've seen Southampton come within 10 minutes of getting what would have been probably recording possibly the most humiliating result for United in the Premier League era. But in terms of the performance last night, until the penalty, which I don't think it was a penalty, it was so bizarre when the referee signalled a VAR review, because I don't think anybody in the ground, apart from the referee possibly, knew what it was for, and that was only because it was communicated to him by the Dutch VAR through the headset. But it was pretty baffling. But normally when those things happen in UEFA games, you know what's coming next, and you saw the replay and you thought, well, I don't think that's a penalty. I'm sure you don't think it's a penalty. I'm sure the majority of people, certainly who watch Premier League football in England, don't think it's a penalty. But strangely, the way they interpret handballs in UEFA competitions or on the continent, it is very different. And you just knew that as soon as you saw the replay, that Sociedad were going to get the penalty. And up until that point, they'd been really poor, Sociedad. I mean, they were top half side in La Liga, but I think they've only got 23 goals in 26 games. They've got a goal difference of -4. And watching them last night, you could see why they have those numbers against them. And also last night, you can see why Anthony is cutting the mustard in Spain, because if that's a top half side, it can't be too difficult to excel in La Liga. And the sedate pace of the game certainly benefited United. It benefited Casemiro, who I thought had a pretty good game. There were some other pretty good performers in terms of their consistency over 90 minutes. And they do look like a side that are better suited with the personnel and the state of play at the club at the moment. They look better suited to European football, where of course the pace is slower. Last night it was so slow, it felt like Sociedad was still drowsy from their siestas and maybe taken aback by by the afternoon kickoff. And really, it was only with the penalty that woke up Sociedad, and they had by far and away their best spell in the last 20 minutes. And as Amrim said afterwards, United could have lost that game because the chances were there for Sociedad. They probably should have gone 2-1 up with the chance that came to the substitute. I forget his name, he's the Scandinavian lad, isn't he? But Orkerson,
yeah.
Yeah. He should have scored that. Banana made 1 or 2 big saves. So I think United have to be pretty content overall with it. But of course, where their home form has been so problematic this season, I think some supporters do feel uneasy by the fact that they didn't win that game last night, and they had the opportunities to win it.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned there about the home form across the board. It has been up and down this season, to say the least, but they are still obviously unbeaten in the Europa League, home and away, only drawing with FC 20 at home. You would like to think United will be favourites going into the second leg. It's often said that obviously a two-legged tie can't be won in the first leg, but it can be lost. But this is finally balanced. And United have got to fancy the chance in a competition realistically now. They've got to win to salvage anything from this season.
Yes, and I do think they will back themselves, irrespective of which players are available and unavailable on the injury front, because they obviously they came out here without 10 players due to injury. That may be the case against Arsenal again at the weekend, so it doesn't leave Amrin with much room to manoeuvre or rotate even, which ideally, if you've got a big enough squad, you would absolutely do that, because it's a Thursday, Sunday schedule. We know how difficult they can be for coaches in terms of juggling those Europa League or Conference League and league match day commitments as well. But as I said, Sociedad, I was really, really unimpressed by them. And I suppose, can they play as badly in the second leg? I wouldn't have thought not. I'd have thought they'd have had a bit more about themselves, and they will know that there'll be a lot more pressure on United. And we've seen how United's Old Trafford when the pressure is on, as I just mentioned, in terms of the teams who nearly got results against them. I mean, the 3 teams that will go down this season, they all lost in very, very tight circumstances since the turn of the year, never mind this season. And that's something that I'm sure Sociedad will be made aware of by their coach, Bruno Lage. And it's something for them to take into the game. But if United play as reasonably well as they did last night, I think they will get through. But ideally, you want, even from a journalistic perspective, you want an easy, serene night, no extra time. But I think there's a high chance of that because of how the 2 teams performed last night. But the problem United have is that they hardly ever go 2-0 up in games. And it's a night where you really, really do hope that they go 2-0 up next week. But they've only done it twice under Amram. That was against Everton in his 3rd game in charge, his first at Old Trafford in the Premier League, and against FCSB in January. And you look at the standard of those opponents. Everton were a sinking ship at the time under Sean Dyche. FCSB were pretty close to United in the Europa League table, and of course they have got to the last 16 as well. But again, it's a tie that United should be winning by a 2-goal scoreline at the very minimum, you'd think, with the resources that they have at their disposal going into that match. So it's a well-poised tie going into that second leg. And the one thing that does need to change is that, I mean, Amram said before last night's match that it would be intense at the start. It really wasn't. It did not feel like the European knockout tie. There was very little build-up to the game in Spain, somewhat understandably, because there was a Madrid derby in the Champions League on Tuesday night. Barcelona had quite an eventful night against Benfica on Wednesday night in the Champions League. And just really, United are not the draw that they used to be. There were some spare tickets in the away end last night. There were 4,000 unsold Sociedad home tickets, which I was really surprised by. But when you look at the attendance breakdown for Sociedad this season, it's been in the 20,000s recently. And the only time that they've got close to selling out the stadium, which holds nearly 40,000, was when Real Madrid came to town and when Barcelona came to town. And it's been an age since Manchester United could be credibly bracketed with those 2 clubs.
Yeah, absolutely. But looking at individuals from last night, Samuel, you already mentioned that you felt Casemiro had a good game, felt that the pace of the game helped, and obviously his experience of playing in the Spanish league. But Joshua Zirkzee, obviously, the goal, the biggest talking point, but another really accomplished, promising performance from him in one of the 2 number 10 positions. that positional switch really seems to have aided his game and allowed him to go up through the gears. He arrived at Old Trafford, obviously expected to compete with Rasmus Højlund as that number 9. He never has been a number 9, a natural number 9. But in this position, we're starting to see the best of him on a more consistent and regular basis.
Well, is it 4 or 5 games now on the spin that he's started?
Yeah.
It's one of the 2 number 10s, isn't it? And he certainly looks a lot more comfortable there. And teammates have, I think they probably cottoned on a lot quicker than Amrim did, that he's not a number 9, and that's on the club. You know, there's a if the club are signing someone who's essentially being bought to be the second striker or the support striker for Rasmus Højlund, and it turns out he's not a striker, that is really bad recruitment. But is Xerxes a bad player? No, he's not. You can see his technique and his balance on the ball. He's been a very good 5-a-side player, as you'd expect most professional footballers to be a good 5-a-side player. But he has got something about him. If the quality is certainly lacking, and it is because of, you know, he's not a goal scorer. He's not what United needed in the summer, and that's on them. But he's got character. He showed really impressive resilience after the humiliation of being substituted in the first third minute against Newcastle to come on and have a good impact against Anfield, and then come on and win the penalty shootout and play pretty well against Arsenal. And he had those 2 performances within 2 weeks of that substitution against Newcastle. And he has got some important goals along the way. Last night was another one. He got an important goal to get them back in it against Leicester. He does need to provide. He needs to score far more often than he does. Whether he's number 9 or number 10, whatever position he plays in, he is a forward. So he's got to be, you know, a lot more prolific than he has been. But it feels like Amrim has certainly found a niche for him in that role as 1 and 2 number 10s. And I've spoken before about how there are a lot of players in that squad that jar with Amrim's system and the way he wants United to play. And it's going to be fascinating to see what they do or what they can do in the summer, because one, you don't want to just recruit players for the manager or the system, because that's the mistake they made under Ten Hag. But also, you are going to have to recruit players for the manager and the system, because he plays in a very singular way, and you want this guy to be a long-term coach at Manchester United as well. But you are also going to have to, like, in the case of Dorgu, he can play left back, he can play left wing. That kind of fits the criteria in terms of it being a signing for the manager and a signing for the club, and they need to ensure that they do that with every player that comes in the summer. And with Xerxes, I thought he was a write-off probably in November, maybe even before Amrim took charge, because I think we still all just recognise him as a striker, and credit to him, credit to Amrim as well. It's not been so much a reinvention that's happened, because I think people are quite aware that he liked to play in a more withdrawn role, not stay high up the pitch, almost double as a playmaker when he was playing for Bologna. But it's, yeah, there has been an awful lot of trial and error with Xerxes in the way he's been used by Amrim. That Everton game I mentioned earlier, he scored 2 goals in it, and he was playing as the number 9 that day. And at that time, Amrim would have thought it's going to be him or Højlund that plays at the top of the tree. And that's no longer the case. And Højlund is obviously being played out of necessity because there's no other striker in Amrim's eyes. I completely understand that. He's not really got a senior alternative option there. But at least he has got in Xerxes and Garnacho, 2 players who can have their moments, even though they still don't score anywhere near enough goals. And Garnacho's gone 22 games now without a goal for United, which is pretty scandalous for a winger. And then I know his position has changed and there have been some issues along the way there, but he did get, I think it was 8 goals in the first 20 games this season. He had a really good start to the season. But they can't just always rely on Bruno Fernandes to do something out of nothing. And even Fernandes is probably the most clinical finisher in that squad. Even he didn't quite get it right last night with that goal-bound shot that was blocked very impressively on the line. So Xerxes having a bit more about him is, it is an undeniable positive. But whether it will do him for the long term at United, I still have my doubts, because they need more suitable players for those for the position he's playing in, and also high caliber players as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned Garnacho there, Samuel, and it's quite an interesting point how obviously he has been on such a long run without scoring, but it was another assist for him last night, teeing up Xerxes for the goal. But I was staggering. Look at the numbers. He's not been directly involved in a Premier League goal now since the Leicester game, which was under Ruud van Nistelrooy. But United generally speaking, looks so much better in attack when he's on the pitch, even though he's not necessarily directly involved in as many goals as his performances might suggest he has been.
I agree with you. His performance last night was quite maddening. Just his ball striking so close to goal at the moment is dreadful, and it's not always been, but certainly in his first full season in 22-23, he did miss some big chances. It felt like I remember some games against Burnley in the League Cup and Leeds at home that stood out where he didn't get it right, and he should have been scoring those chances. And at that time, and even to a lesser extent this season, you downplay it because he's a young player, he's learning his trade, he's got a lot of pressure on his shoulders, he doesn't turn 21 until July, he's due to be cut some slack. But he's nearly played 130 times for United in the first team now. And there comes a point where you have to remove the slack, the slice of slack that you're cutting in, because he's got to be more consistent with his chance conversion. And he's not the only one. If United are to win the Europa League, they're going to have to increase their chance conversion. And it's a very obvious point to make that if you don't score enough goals and if you struggle to score goals, you are going to struggle, and the chances are you're going to have a bad season. And that is exactly what's been happening with United this season. Against Fulham, they had the chances to win that, and unfortunately for them, it was a very raw striker who had barely an hour of first team football under his belt, and it only turned 17 November, who got those chances. And maybe Chido Obi should have at least taken one of them. Certainly the first finish he had where he spooned it so far wide, it didn't even go out for a goal kick. There were two ways of looking at it. You think you should be doing better there, but also you think, well, it's a high stakes match for a young kid like that to come into, and it shouldn't all be on him. But he was getting closer and closer, and unfortunately, Bern Leno made a very good save with the third opportunity that he had. But he did have the chances to win it, and there'll be other managers out there who, I mean, Amorim said after the game, and I think he was quite fair in saying that he was naive with some of the things he did. There'll be some managers out there who treated him a lot harsher after that, especially if they'd gone out for cup competition. But you can't pin all of that on a 17-year-old who only made his debut, less than 4 weeks ago. It's very. There's a reason why Marcus Rashford captured imagination so vividly when he came into the team 9 years ago. That's because he scored 4 goals in his first 2 games, but that does not. That is rare. He's an exception to the norm, certainly as far as academy players coming into the United side are concerned. And that's why Garnacho, now where he's turning 21 this year, he's been a father since midway or a third of the way through last season. He is in a lot of people's eyes. They'd probably hesitate to say that he's still a young player because of the amount of first team experience he's accrued and the amount of exposure that he's had over the past nearly 3 years. I think it was late April 2022 that he made his debut. So it is getting to the point now where you can't keep cutting him slices of slack. And last night he did look drained of confidence when he got the ball. Those 2 shots that he had, when was the side netting? I don't think anyone's saying he should be scoring those goals because they were awkward chances, but he has to be hitting a target in the first place. And if you hit the target, there could be a deflection or a ricochet, or the defender could kick it against his own foot and it could go in. And that seems beyond a lot of United players at the moment. And it is problematic and it is pretty desperate when we're looking at Rasmus Højlund, who was a lot better last night than he was against Fulham, yet he still did not have a single shot at goal. And he's now gone 19 games without scoring. Garnacho's gone 22 games without scoring. Xerxes only got 2 goals this calendar year and 6 overall for the season. So I don't want to keep on repeating myself about the lack of goals in the team because everyone's well aware of it. But those 3 players, they have got to start. They've got to start scoring. It's a very, very simple and basic principle of football. If they score goals, then United might start winning matches more consistently.
Yeah, without a doubt. And Ruben Amorim said to one of the rights holders pre-match ahead of last night's game that he felt the Europa League was the platform for Rasmus Højlund to get himself back on track. He's got 5 goals in the competition this season. There was obviously a notable moment in the first half where he could have ended that drought when Diogo Dalot failed to send the ball over when it looked easy enough for him to connect with it and score. It's just one of those moments again, isn't it, where you feel if that pass had been supplied and that had gone in, that might have been a turning point. But obviously the run now stands, as you've said, Samuel, 19 games without a goal for him.
Yeah, and he went ballistic at Dalot, and he had every right to as well. Yeah, a few moments later on, when there was a stoppage, Dalot kind of like apologetically slapped hands with Højlund. It certainly wasn't a high five, but at that moment, I mean, where the press box was, you may have seen it from some of our pictures and video, it was quite high up. So you've got that tactical vantage point, if you like. And it was clear as day, as Dalot was even just running onto the ball, what had to happen, because Højlund was making exactly the right run. It was near post. He was onside. Dalot was ahead of the defender. There was absolutely nothing wrong with the attack. It was really well orchestrated until Dalot failed to put the cross in. And it was just inexplicable. And the only way he gets away with that is if the ball ends up in the back of the net by another player. And of course it didn't. Patrick Dorgu ended up slicing the shot well wide with his right foot. So that was the one time, I think, during this run where you looked at one and I thought, you've been hard done by there, because other times his body language hasn't been good enough. He's been ducking out of challenges. He's not overexerting himself in an attempt to end that goal drought. But last night he was entitled to have a pop at Dalot, and there's a little bit of history there in that they had a tiff over Copenhagen's equaliser last season in the 4-3 defeat when Dalot switched off at the far post. And I think Højlund, who scored 2 goals that night and put United 2-0 up, it looked like they were going to coast through the game until Marcus Rashford got sent off. Højlund went spare at him then as well. So he has got it in Højlund to actually to really unload at players, regardless of their seniority or experience or age. He's certainly not cowed by them at all. And I think that's a good trait to have. But of course, you've got to back it up with goals. And last night, you can absolutely sympathise with him. Some of those games recently, I don't think anybody's had any sympathy with him, and that's been reflected by some of the crowd reactions to his substitutions against Everton away from home and Fulham at Old Trafford. And when both, the away support and the home support can be quite different at times, but when they're both essentially in unison regarding a player's stock at that time, then you've got a problem. But the point you raised about what Amorim said, that how the Europa League can be a good platform for him, he does look better in the Europa League, and that's because the pace is slower. And that is still, even though it's a positive, it's also a concern, because the Premier League is much quicker game. It's played at a far quicker speed, and he's got to get up to speed if he wants to do it at Manchester United, because the majority of their games are in the Premier League, and the FA Cup and the League Cup can operate at a similar pace as well. So it was strange, as I said, in that it felt like Højlund had a relatively okay night. It was certainly an improvement on recent games, but he still didn't have a shot, and that was not entirely down to him. As I said, Dalot with that failure to cross. There were a couple of occasions in the second half where Højlund was looking to the heavens after Alejandro Garnacho hit the side netting. I can't remember what game it was. It might have been. In fact, I think it was the Southampton game, because it was at 0-0 when it was a chance for United to take the lead in a game that they went behind. But Højlund pulled the ball back to Garnacho and he fired wide, and Højlund went berserk at him at that. And on that occasion, I thought that's not the right reaction to have, just berating a teammate because they've missed, because are you really going to get much out of them by doing that? But that just highlighted his frustration at the time. And even at that point, he'd probably only gone half a dozen, maybe 7-8 games without a goal. And of course, it's more than double that now.
Yeah, almost at 20 now. And fingers crossed for him, it does change soon, because you sort of look at that moment last night and you think, when you're a striker absolutely bereft of confidence as he must be, you've got to think that could have been the moment where things could have changed. But that does conclude part 1 of this episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. Do rejoin us in part 2 in a moment's time, and we'll look ahead to Sunday's clash with Arsenal at Old Trafford. Welcome back to part 2 of the Samuel Luckhurst Show from the Manchester Evening News. As I mentioned a moment or so ago, we're now going to talk about Sunday's Premier League tussle with Arsenal. Samuel, it's a big game, obviously two big clubs with a very, very big and intense historic rivalry there. But United again going into this one as underdogs.
Yeah, you look at where they are in the table, and they go into most Premier League games as underdogs. And Arsenal, of course, had a rather resounding win in midweek, to put it mildly, by absolutely annihilating PSV Eindhoven 7-1 in the Champions League. It's a dilemma for Ruben Amorim this weekend, because the bigger game for United before the biggest game for United ahead of the March internationals by a considerable distance is Real Sociedad at home next Thursday. And I mean, I imagine this podcast is going out after the 1:30 embargo, and he said in that embargo section that in terms of Champions League and Europa League, he says he finds it much more difficult with Europa League because of the Thursday-Sunday schedule. And you try and think like a player, and the amount of times teams have played the Champions League on Wednesday and then they've played on Saturday, that happens quite often. But it is a different kind of mental shift when you go from Thursday, the day before Friday, where people are in weekend mode, and then you're playing on Sunday, the very last day of the week. Obviously, the physical side of it comes into it because of the workload that players have to take on, and they have a recovery day the day after playing a match. Then it's a training day, then it's a match. So that is intense. And he's not really got much room to manoeuvre either in terms of rotation, because from what Amorim told us, he doesn't think that any players will come back from injuries. That's still 10 players out injured. Chido Obi, of course, will be available. Toby Collier, who I thought was quite bright during his cameo last night, he's back from injury, so that offers an option to freshen it up in midfield, because I don't think Casemiro could play Thursday, especially with Arsenal as the opponents on the Sunday, and that game against Real Sociedad next week. As I said earlier, I think there's a decent chance that could go into extra time, given the skill set or the lack of skill set that both sides have. And you don't want to get flashed either at the weekend. So Amorim doesn't want to just rotate and play a bunch of kids. I think it would be far too early to do that anyway. I think if United had the semi-final, fair enough. They did that in 2017. Arsenal did that when they played at Old Trafford in 2018, when that match was sandwiched between their Europa League semi-finals against Atletico Madrid. That game was just kind of written off, because the priority, of course, was to try and win the Europa League and of course get back into the Champions League. And it was also Arsene Wenger's final weeks in charge of United at that point. So it doesn't bode well for them going into this game at the weekend. But Arsenal, they can't score 7 goals again. You would have thought. I mean, the fact that they did that without a striker made it a particularly creditable haul in midweek, and it's particularly damning on PSV. And wasn't surprised to see that Tyrell Malacia played out the entirety of the match as well. Although I haven't seen the highlights, so I can't say for certain how culpable he was for some of the goals that went in. But it's a game that I think United just got to get out the road, perform respectably. There is not going to be high expectations. Yes, in the past they've beaten Arsenal with some teams that could make the pub quiz question answers, with Paddy McNair and Tyler Blackett in the back three against Arsenal in 2014 when Louis van Gaal was in charge. The Rashford debut, of course, where the back four was, I think it was Guillermo Varela, Michael Carrick, Daley Blind, Marcus Rojo, and it ended with Varela, Carrick, Blind, and Timothy Fosu Mensah making his debut. That's how what a motley crew it was that Van Gaal had to assemble. And of course, you never saw that back four ever again. So they have shown in the past they can do it. 2011, the De Silvas on either side in midfield with John O'Shea and Darren Gibson in central midfield. They beat Arsenal 2-0 in the FA Cup quarter-final. But this is a very different Arsenal team now. It's a serious Arsenal side, and they've been a pretty serious side for a good few years now.
Your memory and knowledge never fails to cease to amaze me at all, Samuel. How you remembered those combinations from all those years ago. Very impressive, I must say. But obviously, we spoke last Friday about United's sort of power to recovery and how many times they've fallen behind. They've conceded first in each of the last 4 home games. I think it's something like 7 or 8 in the last 10 they've conceded first as well. Obviously, any game, the first goal is often key, but United, obviously, at home this season, they've rarely set the tone in matches. They've often been chasing. They need something to get a crowd up in the first minute. I think Gary Neville said after the Fulham game in the FA Cup last weekend that he was among the fans on Sunday and he felt a really sombre mood from the off and sense of disgruntlement. United need to give the fans something to cling on to here, I think, in a game of such importance and magnitude, in the sense that there's such a big rivalry between the two.
Well, the atmosphere could be amplified by the protests that are planned this weekend against the principally the Glazer family's ownership, because they are still the main owners, even though Sir Jim Ratcliffe has been at the forefront of the decisions that have been taken at the football club over the past year. And fans have been urged to wear black to symbolise, in their view, that the club is slowly dying. So it will be interesting to see how the mood starts, how it shifts. But I think it will certainly be amplified by this protest, and it feels like we're veterans of protests now. From obviously when the Liverpool game was postponed during the COVID-19 pandemic, in response to the Super League, and a year later around the Norwich game when the shutters were coming down and we couldn't get back into the press room and were slightly late for kick-off because of what was going on outside. The night of the Liverpool game, at the start of Eric Ten Hag's first season as well, there was a very was quite a fervent protest. It felt like United channeled all this negative energy into this unbelievably positive performance and result as they beat Liverpool that evening. So it's rare that a season goes without a protest. And there was I think after the Forest game at the start of last season, fans stayed inside for up to an hour after the match. Again, essentially just shouting the same message that they've been shouting for 15 years or so, which is we want Glazers out, and they'll be belting that out again on Sunday. So it will be interesting to see how United players react to that. I don't think it's necessarily had a bearing on their performances in the past, these protests. If anything, it's had I don't think they're doing these protests to have the effect of, look, this could galvanise the players. They're doing it for a separate cause, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Amrim said last week about how the players, they live in a bubble a little bit, so they're not all of them, or certainly the majority, aren't particularly affected by some of the decisions that are going on in the background at the club. Some are, but they're in the minority. Like I remember when Johnny Evans spoke about the redundancies in the pre-season tour, he made certain comments that we knew because we know the people, which were, without him saying directly, were a reference to certain people who'd been at the club for a very long time, and he really sympathised with them. There are one or two others as well who are appalled by what's going on there, and they sympathise with those who've lost their jobs and those who will lose their jobs as well. But of course, where United players' attendances in mixed zones can be, they are always dependent on the result. You've not exactly had United players rushing out from the dressing room to talk to us and express how sad they are with what's happening. Because, as I said, Amrit said they live in a bubble, and this week, just in terms of going to the airport for the flight to San Sebastian, the car parking bays, United reserved only half the normal amount they do, because they wanted them for the first team. And Amrim, his coaching staff, and the other staff, backroom staff who were going on the trip, they were bused to the airport from Carrington. United, speaking to people at United, they stressed that was not a cost-cutting measure, but the priority will always be the first team, because as Ratcliffe said himself, he feels as though if the first team are doing well, everything's well. And he's got a point to an extent. I think he said that morale will just be lifted at the club if the results are going well, and that's not the case at all, because they were going to make people redundant, whatever was happening on the pitch. It felt like, and there was always going to be a hangover from the redundancies last year as well. But the players have that advantage, and that's why there is a big onus on them. But whether, I can't imagine there are many players who go out there who feel like I've got a duty to perform here and help us get a result, because look what's happening left, right, and centre at the club, with fans being hit by ticket price hikes, by good people at the club losing their jobs or being put at risk. I don't think many professional footballers think that way, and certainly this generation and a couple of generations, to be fair, they are very insulated from what's happening, not just outside the club, but even inside the club.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking at the matters on the pitch and the team selection regarding Sunday, Patrick Dogo obviously is going to serve the second game of his 3-game domestic ban, which means yet another tweak at left wing back presumption. I would expect Diego Dallo to go back out to that side. Nusa Mazraoui more than likely to cover him at right wing back. If Harry Maguire is going to miss out again, obviously Lissandro Martinez is still missing and will be for a while. It opens the door for Victor Lindelof or Aidan Heaven, the former Arsenal man, to possibly start alongside Lenny Yoro and Matthias de Ligt. Lindelof probably feels the more likely candidate of the two to get a start for a game of such magnitude, you would think.
You would, and I mean, Aidan Heaven did very well when he came in for his debut last week. I think it kind of got lost amid the fact that United lost and lost on penalties, but those 30 minutes he had in extra time, I don't think he really did anything wrong. He was very composed, and obviously a lot of players in that picture would have been tired, and Fulham's attacking threat had significantly subsided, but it was a very creditable debut. But as you said, it will be Lindelof who comes in, which again it's pretty dire state of affairs at United that Victor Lindelof is coming in for a game against Arsenal due to injuries. And it's not like they've got huge injury issues at centre back. I'd argue Martinez is a huge loss, of course. I think Harry Maguire's injury is not too bad, but they're having to manage it very carefully so they don't aggravate it. But the fact that, Lindelof, he seems to get a look in every season, however much he plays or however little he plays, and he's coming into the final months at United, and he has outstayed his welcome, but it doesn't exactly. I don't think many United fans will be lifted by his presence in the starting 11 this weekend. I mean, the interesting thing going into the game is what Amram. The most interesting thing is what Amram said to us in the embargoed section when it was the final question. I just asked him that, given what Mikel Arteta went through at Arsenal, where he had to phase out some big players and make some big decisions to make them a force again, did he see any similarities with that? And Amram said, I will not get the time that Arteta has had at Arsenal. And he's right. Arsenal are a big club. They're one of the top 3 biggest clubs in England, with United and Liverpool. But they've gone 21 years without winning the title. There's a pretty decent chance they'll go more than 5 years without a trophy. And that trophy was won during the pandemic behind closed doors at Wembley. So it feels rather hollow. And Arteta, I think, has done a very good job at Arsenal in terms of making them a force again. But would a Manchester United manager be able to withstand the criticism and scrutiny he had in his first, I think it was pretty much the first 2 years, wasn't it? Given that he came in December 2019, and I think it was at the end of 21-22, they finished 5th, and you thought they could be on the rise again, or it might be a full storm. But Amram is right. It is a different level of scrutiny that you get at Manchester United compared with Arsenal, who you just have to look at their online fan base, and they have by far and away the most unhinged contingent of online fans of any Premier League club. So it's not like the manager gets away scot-free, but Manchester United is a different level. And Amram said they have to survive this game on Sunday, and I can empathise with him on that because of the Sociedad next week and the injuries they have to contend with.
Yeah, definitely. And sort of just to wrap up, Samuel, as well, it's probably lost perhaps on some with obviously having played Fulham in the FA Cup and then Sociedad last night that United are in with a chance of recording back-to-back league wins for the first time since May last year this weekend. So it's a big task, obviously, coming up against Arsenal. But if they were to get that, it might give them a decent psychological boost ahead of arguably the bigger game of the week, as you've already said, against Sociedad next Thursday.
Yeah, I think maybe even the club website won't even preview this game as United have a chance to win successive league matches for the first time this season. It's that had unsurprisingly been lost on me due to the schedule, and of course, well, they've played 2 games since the last league game. Yeah, I somehow don't think it will be two Premier League wins in a row for the first time this season. I would be pleasantly surprised if that does happen. And as I said, they've got form. You look at those games, 2011, 2014, 2016, those unpredictable teams that Alex Ferguson and Louis van Gaal picked against Arsenal, and they won all 3 of them. So there's a slight chance, I suppose, but as I said, it's a very different Arsenal side that United will be coming up against to those latter year Wenger teams when United really had their number by that point, and Arsenal were very difficult. They were the complete opposite. They were very easy to play against.
Well, we shall see. Fingers firmly crossed for Sunday, and we'll see what happens. And that does mark the end of this episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel or wherever you get your podcasts from. Also, leave a like and a comment as well. Myself and Samuel will be back again on Monday to review the clash with Arsenal and look ahead to that second meeting with Sociedad on Thursday night. Make sure you subscribe for when that drops, and we'll catch you again next week for another episode of the Samuel Luckhurst Show.